Hello Bat fans, Luke here, back with yet another video, and today we're going to take a look at another story that not too many people talk about, and that is Gotham by Gaslight, which is an Elseworld story told by the creative team of Brian Augustine, Michael Magnola, P. Craig Russell, and David Horning. This book released, at least this print anyway, circa 1989. Again, it's an Elseworld story, and it deals primarily with the theme of the story of Jack the Ripper, who was a mass murderer around in London around the 1880s. And really, when it comes down to, why am I doing this particular story? What's the motivation behind it? Well, if you haven't seen on the internet lately, there has been a new Batman animated movie that's been announced, and the trailer, which already been released. I think this next release is due sometime in spring 18, I believe. And it is Gotham by Gaslight. And I'm not gonna debate, the success of some of these Batman animated movies. Some have been good, some not as much. I tend to lean toward, I generally enjoyed all of them on some scale, again, some more than others, but I really do think Gotham by Gaslight does have a chance to really be a good film, and I'll get to that toward the end of this video. But really, this story, again, Gotham by Gaslight, kind of give you the quick Cliff Note version of the theme behind the story, because the theme that it's, or not really a theme, and I really don't want to say source material, because Jack the Ripper, his story really has been told in several different books. I recently read one, I can't remember the name of it, but it's been about 2 years. It was actually pretty decent, but the background story maybe might be a more accurate tale. So, again, London, 1880s, and there's a town called Whitechapel, and Whitechapel actually is one of my favorite metal bands are out right now, and turned out, yeah, they got the inspiration for the name based off the Jack the Ripper character. But there were 5 females who were murdered in the streets of Whitechapel around 1880s. These females were alleged to be, don't want to say prostitutes, but they were possibly prostitutes. And the way these females were murdered were that their throats were slit and their organs were surgically removed. I say surgically, but we'll just say someone who may have had extensive training in surgery or surgical measures really left kind of a mark. So no one really knew who Jack the Ripper was. No one was ever picked up or arrested. There were several correspondents that were sent to the local police, who were just getting kind of started, the modern police as we know it, in London about that time, and some other people claiming to be Jack the Ripper or know of Jack the Ripper, kind of get hints for to capture this individual, but the person was never really found, per se. And there was one theory, was that this was actually, Jack the Ripper was actually an American who traveled obviously from America to London about the same time, 1888, and then came back and murdered about 20 people. I can't remember the individual's name, but it's alleged that this person who just happened to be in London about the same time the Jack the Ripper killings occurred, and then came back to America and then killed about 20 people. Again, the name's really forgetting me. Or forgetting me. That's kind of crappy. But anyway, I'm going way too far into that. But that's basically Jack the Ripper. And what we have here in Gotham by Gaslight is almost a Batman adaptation of the Jack the Ripper story, in that pretty much note for note, the Jack the Ripper story occurs in this book. And this book is actually, it's really thin. This thing will take you about a half hour to read, and it's a quick read. It's quick, but what you get is somewhat dense, but dense, not as dense as it's a fully fleshed out story. There are a lot of details that kind of gets skimped over, or they really don't go too far in depth. And this is where I think the movie is actually going to concede, because I think really the movie's going to flesh out some of the pieces of information that were either really quickly bypassed in the story or barely touched on. And what we have here is we have Bruce, who's actually going out to London. Spent about 5 years in London. And you see this art by Magnolia, and it really does capture the theme that behind the story. Man, that is a really blurry picture. The black, and it's this one's showing here the murder of Thomas and Martha Wayne, and we go kind of to present day in Vienna, 1889. This is right after, obviously, the murders of Jack the Ripper. But this is Bruce kind of getting some of his training to become Batman that we see as he's going across the world in the early days. Not only becoming, like a martial artist expert, but this is him learning from the experts of, the detective facets of his character, which really does get glossed over a lot lately. I mean, I really like to see, the stories are really hone in on the detective aspects of his character. In this story here, you kind of get a lot of that. You don't get a lot of the Batman, the brooding Batman. You do toward the end, but this is really the formation of Batman, the detective, and even though he does kind of have a rough time in this story, we'll get that in a minute, but as he's coming back, he runs into Jacob Packer, who he refers to him as his uncle, but he was actually a really good friend of his father, Thomas. And they make their venture back to America, and obviously they have a good time, and blah, blah, blah. And once they get back, that's when we start to notice some of these murders that are occurring. Bruce actually has a close relationship with Inspector Gordon. Honestly, this is soon to be, Commissioner Gordon, whatever. But Inspector Gordon's kind of stuck behind all these murders that are going on. As we see here, some of these females that are getting killed, those who are kind of lurking around the street, who kind of fit the mold of the alleged victims of Jack the Ripper in England or London. And this is Inspector Gordon really having trouble with this case. But then you see Batman, who's kind of getting involved in this too. He's starting to apply his skills as a detective to try to bring this case down. But all is not what it really seems. In that someone comes up, attempts to frame Bruce Wayne, and Bruce actually gets, as we see here, Jack the Ripper. Remembers what I was saying, because it kind of mirrors the story that we had all these murders that are going on in London are now coming back to America, which led people to believe in the story. Jack the Ripper, hey, he's in Gotham. But we do see a twist in this, in that Bruce Wayne is set up when the police come to his house, and that he is alleged to believe to be Jack the Ripper based off the murder weapon in his house, which is a stretch, but again, kind of get to these little details here in a minute. But Bruce Wayne thinks he's going to have a real open and shut case in court. Obviously, it doesn't happen, and he is ultimately found guilty of the murder. And obviously, that's not true, but Bruce is able to get out of jail, and then he dons, the cape and cowl Batman again, and he's able to solve the murder of, who is, Jack the Ripper. And I'm not going to go ahead and show that, because that's really going to spoil the heck out of this book and potentially the movie, which I really don't want to do. So this story, again, it's a quick read. Again, if you're spending more than a half hour on it, I don't know. It's one of those brisk reads, but it's good. It's fun for those who like, those stories set on historical events, and you kind of take that foundation of the story and kind of apply it to, the comic book world or whatever, and really adapt it into a Batman type story, which, as gruesome as the story is behind Jack the Ripper, you do kind of see how this would actually be a good match to kind of adapt it into the Batman world. So, going more into the fastest of the story, the writing in this, again, I think the dialogue is good, and I think what the writer does really well, and I love the very first page when you open up. It's just kind of like a letter excerpt, blurry camera, but it's really a letter to the police on from quote unquote Jack the Ripper. It really does set you in the mood right off the bat. But what I do like about how the writer does this story, it does move pretty briskly, but I think the details kind of flow in that it does obviously keep the story self-contained. Some of the dialogue is kind of set in that 1880s era type of dialogue we would see about people who would actually talk in that time and civilization. So it does kind of keep that feel of the time period it's referencing in the story. What I do have a problem again with the story is that it really does jump a lot. There's some details like Batman's in jail, and by the time he's found guilty, he's supposed to be hung 5 days later. It jumps kind of like one caption. Let's see if I can get there with that. I don't want to spoil the end of it, but you see here, I'll go, if I can really get this camera to focus, which of course it's not, but just it goes from the 21st, 23rd, 26th, and I'm sure there's some things that really could have occurred between then that really could have been inserted to kind of really, really go more in depth in the story. So that's kind of what I was talking about before, and that some of the details are kind of quickly jumped over, or they're not really flushed out as much. Now, again, maybe if you're trying to say, hey, we're trying to keep this as a self-contained short story, you really can't afford to go in too much into details, and I can get that, but I think when you're reading it, you're just kind of wondering as you're reading something like, oh man, some maybe could have been, something of a missed opportunity to kind of flush out that detail a little bit more, kind of get more of a suspense, especially toward the ending, because the ending really does, by the time you get to the highlight of the final crescendo between Batman and this other person, it does get kind of glossed over really, really quick. But I do give the credit for the writer. He does a masterful job of really adapting, like I said before, the historical event into the Batman, don't want to say Batman universe, obviously this is not a canon, this is Elseworld, but really adapting it to the Batman theme of the story. Fantastic. The art in this, again, Magnola is the art. I forget what he does. I don't know if he does some of the BPRD stuff. I think he does. I can't. Now, don't quote me on that. But the art is okay. I do have a problem with the colors, which David Horning does. I mean, as you can see, people's skin are like yellow. It's really weird. And then when you get some like the flashback scenes toward the very end, again, trying to get it, I don't spoil it. It's got that really weird yellow, which I just really found kind of disturbing. Not disturbing, but kind of disruptive in those facets. But everything else, I have the colors that I thought was a really good match. It was really dark, which really fit the story. Again, this is the Batman design. It's in 1888. Okay, I get it. So, I mean, I do like the kind of design they came up with. I love how they kind of brought together some of the newspaper articles throughout the book, which is really fantastic in this. And for the most part, I dig the character designs. Again, this is back in that time period. I don't know. This really reminded me as you're reading through it, kind of like Deadly Class. If you been reading, if you haven't been reading Deadly Class, definitely jump aboard. It's a fantastic book over by Image. But you see this a lot in Deadly Class, where a lot of the dialogue or the narration of the story is over to the right next to the pictures, and kind of even intermingling some of the dialogue, which is really does kind of flesh out the story and really kind of keeps everything in perspective. So the art in this is okay. I mean, it's nothing fantastic, but again, I think it fits the mood of the story. The problem is sometimes, especially some I already kind of mentioned, I think another gripe I kind of say, sometimes the colors are too dark. Like you get this when Batman's chasing the person or Jack the Ripper. It's hard to see the details because it's so dark. But yeah, the art for the most part is good. But yeah, I think that's really it. Would I recommend this? Yes, I do recommend it, especially if you are gonna watch the movie. I would say definitely Google or YouTube or even get a book or read a little bit about Jack the Ripper. Just kind of keep things in perspective. But this is good. I don't think this is one of those out of print ones, so you should be able to get your hand on it either in this standalone collection. Again, it's a real short read. It's not very dense at all. Or you might find it in one of those collected Elsewhere books. I know I got Elseworlds, Batman Elseworlds 1 and 2. I didn't see it in number 1. So, but I'm sure you'd be able to get your hand on this somehow, some way. Relatively easy to get your hand on, and I don't think you'll pay much more. $10 if that. I'm not sure. This one cover price is $3.95. Back in the day, so you might be asked to pay about $9-10. I don't know, but I think it's worth it, especially if you're gonna read or watch the movie. So, real quickly about the movie, why I think this is gonna be a success. So again, it's drawn on the inspiration of a pretty good Batman story, which, again, this story left out a lot of details, and I think the movie, if you keep it an hour and a half, can really take advantage of some of those missed opportunities in the book, really flesh out the details. I'll be curious to see how the movie's going to, if it's going to any way, shape, or form, skimp out in some of the violence, because again, it's based on a story, and it's a violent story, especially with this book kind of adapting the theory that Jack the Ripper was an American who came back, killed even more. I mean, this could really be a violent story, which I'm sure they'll keep it in check, but I'm just kind of curious to see how much, if they do any, pull back any punches. So, but yeah, that's why I think the movie's got going for it. It's using source material that has a really good story, but the source material, I think, kind of lend itself open for a good movie adaptation, because as long as the movie producers kind of stay true to the source material, they can really flesh out some of those details that are missed and may really make an enjoyable film. So, anyway, those are my thoughts on Gotham by Gaslight. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of the story. If you have read it, what kind of bat chat about it. What I'll try to do is I'll try to link the trailer for Gotham by Gaslight. Also, I'll see if I can find a pretty decent YouTube video that kind of gives a quick one-over of the Jack the Ripper story. Kind of give you some context, especially if you haven't read this story going in, because I do think you kind of need that context going into this, because it does kind of flush itself out. And I will say the twist in this toward the end of the story, while you could kind of see it coming from a mile away in hindsight, it's pretty decent. So anyway, let me know in the comments below again what you thought. We'll bat chat about it and go from there. So until next time, take care.